I'm going to kind of take a step back because I think, how are you fixed with your presentations that you're doing for tomorrow and your reports? You all right?
Use cue cards.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. But will you make sure that you've practiced those presentations? Because if they're taking longer than 5 minutes, we're not going to get through the whole lot of them and there's going to be trouble. I'll have to stop you before you're finished and you'll lose marks. So make sure when I say 5 minutes, it's 5 minutes. It's not 7 or 8 minutes, it's 5 minutes. If you're slightly under, I won't. There's no problem with that. I know I've covered a lot of material quite quickly and we've kind of moved on. And I think we need to maybe take a bit of a step back and just talk a little bit about kind of what we're doing and what the module is, where it's going and all the rest. What was I going to take out? Sorry, I'm just looking for the handout that I gave you last Friday. Would you take that out for a minute? Have you got a handout from last Friday? Oh, here it is. Okay, so that kind of showed you technology management activities. Now, in the text, and I'm going to try and, this is the first time we've taught this module, so I'm kind of finding my way through it to a certain extent, and I think the text doesn't make things easy. But what it's based around a model that says within technology management there are 5 different activities. If you want to manage technology in your company, the first thing you have to do is identify it. F-I-C-A-T-I-O-N. Okay, so you have to find ways of looking at what technologies are out there. The second thing you have to do is that you have to select whichever technology is going to make sense for your firm. So it's the technology that you're going to actually use. The third thing you have to do is acquire it. Okay? The fourth thing you have to do is exploit it. And the final thing you have to do is protect it. And on top of all of that, you need to learn. Okay? So that's kind of the model. That's how we're looking at technology management. It's about how do you identify what are the right technologies, how do you select them, how do you actually get them, how do you exploit them, and how do you protect them? And within that whole process, how do you learn? And the case studies that I gave you to do were just trying to see how do other companies do that at a very high level, you know, not getting into a huge amount of detail, but just give you some kind of exposure to how other companies manage this whole process and what they do within this whole process. Now, what I'm going to do for the lectures is look at how we do these different things. And I was following the text, and unfortunately I started with acquire because one of the points that the text makes is that companies don't run through these always sequentially. In actual fact, all of these things are happening at the same time in any firm. And it's wrong to think that you normally go through these as a process. But I think in terms of understanding it, it's actually easier to present it that way. So I think I'm going to step back after this and start going through things in this order. But will you keep this in your mind to say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying to figure out, is how do companies manage technology, how do they find the technologies, how do they select the right ones, how do they acquire them, how do they exploit them and protect them, and what kind of things do they do to learn on top of all of that. And that's kind of what we're trying to cover. I know the readings I've given you are a little bit difficult, but I think we'll just work our way through those slowly. I don't expect you to grasp absolutely everything that's in those readings because they're quite academic in how they're written. But I want you to get just some kind of an understanding or a feel at a higher level for how companies are doing these kind of things. So today we're talking about acquire. How do companies acquire technology? And we started last week by looking at, to say there are 2 basic ways that they can acquire technology. They can either get technology internally or they can look externally to get technology, okay? And if you have a look at the case study, again, just trying to kind of put a bit of context around it. Do you remember I asked you to read that first reading? Has anybody read it? the Connect and Develop complements Research and Develop at Procter & Gamble. Has anyone at all read it? No? Yeah? Have some of you read that? Good, okay. If you have a look at figure 2 in that, I will talk a little bit about this today. What they're showing in figure 2 there is some of the ways that Procter & Gamble go about acquiring technologies that they're going to use. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail towards the end of this lecture. But Procter & Gamble are looking at different internal ways that they get technologies, and they're also looking at the external things that they do to get technologies. And the text looks at these, it breaks them down into a couple of different things. If you're doing something internally, you're making it yourself. So you have some kind of an R&D program in place that's allowing you to make stuff yourself. And you have design engineers and you have development engineers that are looking at developing stuff yourself. If you get it externally, you're looking at buying it, okay? So we'll talk about that. So you're looking at buying up small companies and things like mergers and acquisitions and all those kind of things that people will do in order to get technology. The other thing you can do is you can collaborate. Okay? So you can work with somebody external and with your internal people as well, and you can collaborate to develop technology. So that's kind of putting what we're doing there in context. You can either look, this is about acquiring. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah? We're going to have a look at the Procter & Gamble case in a while. Now, I'll just go back to this lecture, which is online, but that was kind of just to say that that's what you should have in your mind when we're looking here. And buying up here, you know, if you see a lot, like medical devices firms will do that. You might buy the technology, so you can actually buy another firm. You could just buy the skill. Or you could subcontract. So you kind of buy in what you need in R&D. So there are different ways of actually buying, and then to collaborate again, there are different ways you can do that. Here we're looking at different ways that you can buy. So you could have licensing agreements. You could use consultants to do development for you. You could buy something through your vendors or suppliers. Or sometimes buying technology might be as simple as buying a new piece of equipment. That might be what you really need in order to get a new technology into your firm. So it could be a new type of processing that you're buying. So you could look at buying, you know, maybe a CNC machine or a new piece of automation or whatever, and that would be a way of buying technology into your firm. So there's lots of ways to buy technology in. We're talking about mainly R&D. Collaborate, well, subcontracting could go either there or there. So collaborating, we're talking of maybe setting up a consortium. So there might be several groups of companies that get together because they want to develop something. And there are some examples of that in this reading here. Or you could do joint ventures. You know, two companies might get together and decide to develop a project. Any examples of that you can think of, where companies have worked together to do stuff? You'd see it in the odd time on the media, wouldn't you, where companies got together and they developed, and there's certainly a couple of examples in here where companies got together. Intel might work with companies to develop stuff. A lot of the IC manufacturers would work with companies to develop stuff. Did Apple work with someone recently? You'd often see kind of software developers working with a hardware developer as well in a kind of a joint venture to bring on a new technology that might have the software and the hardware component of it. Sometimes you won't actually see that from a customer point of view, because that might be happening behind the scenes as well. But those are basically the different ways that a company can get technology. And we're going to use the Procter & Gamble case study to look at some specific examples of how they do that. Now, what else was in this slide? Why do you decide? You know, why would you decide to go with one or the other of these? Like, if you had very strong R&D capability in-house, you probably would decide to develop something yourself. You might decide, so it depends on what your own capabilities are, if you've got very good skills and where you have skills. It depends on how expensive it is to work with other companies. And when they're talking about things like transaction costs and contract costs, there's lots of things in there, and we're not going to go in, and you know, that's kind of master's level stuff. I wouldn't expect you to go into it in a lot of detail. But it's things like, you know, if you're a small company, you might be very vulnerable. It might be very difficult for you to work with an external company because you just don't have the clout to get them to do what you want to do, or even enough money in the bank to get them to do what you want to do. So the decision whether you know, which of these routes you take can depend on a lot of different things. Whether it's a technology that you're familiar with or not familiar with, whether you find somebody easily, you know, whether you actually identify somebody who has the technology you want is going to have an impact on how you get your technology. So there are a lot of different ways that are things that are going to influence that. There isn't one best way to do it. Different companies can do things in different ways. What we might talk about is, like, what would you see would be some of the advantages of doing things internally? If you're a company and you want to develop a new technology, why would you decide to do it internally?
Less cost.
Mm-hmm. It might be cheaper. Which? Who said that? Yeah, so it might be just protection. So what do you mean by that? Yeah, a very critical point. So if it's a technology that is very specific to yourself, you won't want to get somebody else in to help you to develop your stuff. So particularly if you have a kind of market edge in this area, that you're ahead of the rest of the people, you'll decide to keep it. You might decide, any other reasons for making something internally? You might decide that you actually want to develop the expertise. So if you develop something internally, you're bringing your people up to speed. You're developing the expertise in what you're making. Whereas if you buy something, it becomes harder to get that, you know, whether you've, compared to having developed it yourself. Why would you decide to buy something? Why would you decide to buy a technology? Wouldn't obvious reason. Because you found it, because it was there, because it seemed to be suitable. You know, so you could say one thing, you found something suitable. Why else would you buy a technology externally? It could be cheaper. And why would it be cheaper? Yeah, resources. Okay. Or it could be that somebody else has that it's not, it could be that it's not core, couldn't it? So it's not part of your core business. There's this extra technology you need, whether it's a new material or a piece of software, and it's not part of your core business. So you say, we don't want to develop this expertise because we know we can buy it easily. So we're going to just go and buy it. It's going to be cheaper to do it this way. That's another reason why you would decide to make it yourself. You'd protect it if it was part of your core business, if it was something that was really specific to what your company did. Why would you collaborate?
And the funds to go ahead with.
Okay, so that could be for the funds. Less risk. Who said less risk? Why is there less risk? Yeah, so it's a shared risk, isn't it? And you could start getting into details on that, because how companies put together a collaboration agreement will depend on how the risk is shared. So you could have an agreement where you share most of the risk, you know, where you pay for the development whether it works or not. Or you could have a contract where whoever you're working with takes on most of the development and you buy it at different stages when you know it's been proven and it works. So risk is actually a very important factor in how you're doing these things, to decide how much risk are you willing to take, how much risk are you willing to share, and will other companies be willing to share as well. So risk obviously has a big impact on how you're going to do this. So again, we're just kind of recapping on what we did. There isn't one best way to do it. It depends on lots of different things and lots of different things that are going on in your company and the level of the technology, the resources you have, how the market operates. Another reason you might collaborate. Any other reasons you might collaborate?
Lack of skills.
Lack of skills, yeah. You'd also often see collaboration on very large projects. So if it's something that's very, very large or that's industry changing, you might see key players in an industry getting better to collaborate on that. So if it was a very significant project that no one company would really want to take on by themselves, which again is obviously linked to risk, but that might be another case in which you'd see companies collaborating to develop a technology. So make, we spoke about that. There are standard processes that companies use when they're carrying out R&D. And we've got all sorts of models that go behind here. Here's this notion of the innovation funnel, where you start with lots and lots of ideas, and as you develop them further, you narrow down the number of products that you actually bring through. We have an example of a new product development process. So any company that's involved in product development, and you'll have got that from the case studies, will have some kind of a process in place that might have these phases, but will have something that roughly maps onto this. You'll start with an idea or an idea of the market you want to identify. You'll do a little bit of investigation about that to see if it's viable, is it feasible. You might do more detailed investigation in terms of talking to customers and trying to figure out what the size of the market is, how much is it going to cost to develop, looking at things like risks and quality and all that kind of stuff. You'll get into your development process, you'll test it, and then you'll move it into production so that you're selling it. So that kind of a product development process, you'll see it in different, people will call these steps slightly different things. You'll see it in different formats, but essentially you're moving through the same stages. Another example is Cooper's stage gate process, which would be one that a lot of companies would use. So you're moving from a concept to a business case, develop it, test it, launch it, and then some post-launch, after you've launched it, are there other activities you need to do? We spoke last week about levels of innovation, whether it's something that's incremental, platform, or radical. So incremental is a small change, and we had a couple of examples. Platform is something that's slightly bigger, and radical is a significant change, and normally listed, kind of defined as something that's going to change an industry. And we looked at a couple of examples of that weren't necessarily always to do with technology, that we said, or weren't all to do with the product, or indeed weren't all to do with technology, because you could say, in the aircraft industry, there was a radical change when people started, with the low-cost aircrafts. It wasn't a change in the technology, it was a change in the business model. It was how they actually did their business model. But you could look at radical changes in technologies. There's classical studies written up about the disk drive industry. When I started working many, many years ago, we had disks, actually kind of floppy disks and hard disks and stuff like that. We didn't have USB keys. So, and you had disks that took, megs of data or kind of 500K and stuff like that. So that whole industry, the disk drive and the storage industry for data, has hugely grown. And there's been a lot of radical shifts in that over the years. And I think this is where we finished, is it, last week? Yeah? So we finished just looking at this, saying that as a company, you will normally try and have a mix of products, some of them being radical, some of them being incremental. And they can be radical in terms of the process that you're using. So you could actually have a radical innovation that the user hardly sees. It could be a new way of manufacturing that. For instance, people are now using rapid prototyping and stereolithography, where you can build models of things very, very quickly and easily. So over in our labs over there, we can generate 3D models of things very quickly and easily. That could be a radical change to how you do things, because it allows you to design things much more quickly, but your customers might never see that. You could have radical change in terms of the product and what's in your product, and those are ones that are kind of more apparent. But what we said was that companies need a mix of these, that if you're working always up here, it's very high risk. If you're working always down here, it's likely that markets are leaving you behind, that your company just isn't moving fast enough. So you would tend to want to have a portfolio of products or a mix of products that went across all of this. And I don't think we had got this far the last time, had we? No. Okay, so we'll pick up from here. I'm going to move up quickly through some of this, because I'm actually not going to concentrate in a huge amount of detail on these. We'll look at it quickly, but because we have an awful lot to do, and I think that's something that we might kind of come back to later in the course. The other thing that's interesting to look at, and you might actually make a note of this because it's an interesting one to draw, just to kind of see what it's actually about. In terms of new product or new process development, so when we were looking back here, this was really applied to new product development. Okay, it was a mix between the product change and the process change, but this was selecting which products you were going to do, whether they were using new processes or whether the technology and the product itself had changed. Hayes and Wheelwright came out with this model, which is interesting from a manufacturing point of view, which will apply to kind of some of the stuff that you're doing, which looked at mapping the variety in a product against the type of process that would be used to produce something. So whether you had something that was a kind of a continuous flow, what would be a continuous flow type manufacturing system? Which? No, a continuous flow, you're normally talking about things like if you're in a milk processing factory where you have a mass of stuff that's kind of continuous flow. Cars would more be an automated, so it would be kind of an assembly line, which is the next level up. But continuous flow you'll very often see in foods and chemicals, whether they're used, whether it's fertilizers or something like that, or drugs or milk or whatever. Those are the types of things that are continuous flow. You would tend in those circumstances, in some of those circumstances, to have one product with very high volume. So, if you're a company producing chemicals, you'd probably produce one kind of chemical, but lots of it. Yeah, that's probably. Assembly line would be where you have several products but very high volumes as well. So cars would fall into that. And you can move on where your production process is becoming, that there is less flow in your production process. It's becoming more and more piecework, and map that against the amount of volume and the amount of variability that you also have in your product. And by and large, although this is changing, remember this is from 1984, by and large where you have an automated flow, you will have one product with not a lot of variation on the product. Whereas where you have kind of piecework or project work, things that are made very different and specific, they'll be made one at a time, so you'll have low volume and a unique product. Examples of low volume unique products?
Ships.
Ships, absolutely, yeah. So think of the difference between making a ship and a dairy or a chemical plant where you're making batch kind of quantities of chemicals. So that's very much, there's no flow, everything is managed as a project, and you'll be talking about projects later on. Everything is unique and low volume, and very often higher value here as well, because there's a lot more put into manufacturing something. Whereas down here, these tend to be commodities. They're cheaper, you would tend to have second and third sources of those, so that a company could buy from you, but could also buy from other people in the marketplace. So you tend to see this. Now, I reviewed a paper recently that was saying things have changed, that with better manufacturing technologies, you can now look at products where there is a lot of variety, but where you can have higher flows. So what they're saying is that we can move in here, that you can have higher variety but faster flows with increased automation and increased ability to change things on the fly and to customize things on the fly, that we are moving towards different areas down here. But by and large, that still holds true, and that's a model that you'll come back to in some of your other manufacturing modules as well. But it's just looking at process development and how you develop processes. The other thing that's interesting is this notion of innovation and when innovation occurs. I don't think I have an innovation S-curve on here, but again, way back, well, this is in 94, a guy called Jim Utterback came up with this model for where innovation happens and where changes happen. And what he said was that by and large, when there is a new change, a new product in the marketplace, you'll have a lot of product innovation. So people will be coming out with a lot of different versions of that product, but not a lot of process innovation. And markets tend to kind of stabilize on a particular format. And then you'll get the process innovation after that. So where there's something that's new or that's different, you'll get a lot of the product, and then things will kind of become, well, first of all, marketplaces will thin out. So where there's a new version of a product, you'll very often get a lot of competitors, a lot of people in the market space. But as that technology matures, it will become kind of more specific, and there'll be standards and everything set, and you will tend to have smaller numbers of competitors, smaller levels of product innovation, but more process innovation to actually make things easily. Again, can we think of an example of that? I suppose an interesting example, tablet PCs and readers and stuff like that. We're probably here in this stage where we're looking at a lot of different product innovations where we haven't actually, the market hasn't converged on a particular standard, and there's still quite a bit of change going on there. And what you would expect to see is that over time, some of those would just fall away. So you'll see a more standard approach to those kind of products. And at the same time, companies will then concentrate on process innovation so that they can make things cheaper. Once they've got the kind of a monopoly of a marketplace, they'll try and make things cheaper. Trying to think of any other examples of that. Anybody got other examples of that? No, we can come back to it. But what you would tend to see when there is kind of a new invention or something new on a marketplace, you'd see, as I said, lots of this kind of product innovation and then settling down to process innovation. The buy option, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. Some of the things, why would you decide to buy technology as opposed to making it internally? Some of these things we've picked up already. Your resources are limited. Time pressure, okay, so it might be you just don't have the scope, which is limited, linked to resources. You might see a company that has complementary assets to what you have, so rather than getting involved in them yourself, that you'll use them. Protecting your image, it might be that it's not your core business and you're sticking with what you're doing yourself. You might decide to acquire technology in order to diversify, to support internal technologies, or to avoid risks. So there are a range of different reasons that you might actually decide to acquire a technology. What do you expect to get out of acquiring a technology? Lots of examples. You expect to get better productivity. In other words, you're getting something for less than if you were developing it yourself. Higher quality and all the rest. Again, I'm not going to go into those into a huge amount of detail. In acquiring a technology, so if you want to kind of go out and buy a technology, those are the steps that you'll have to go through. So first of all, decide what are you hoping to achieve. Find somebody that you can acquire the technology for. Decide how you're going to acquire it. Come up with the contract and everything, actually transfer the technology, and then manage the long-term relationships. And there was one thing I would say is that, you know, it would seem that it's much easier just to buy in something, but it actually doesn't always work out that way, because you do need to decide how are you going to, you know, how's the technology going to be transferred into your company? How are you going to manage things on a long-term basis? If you need changes made to the technology, how are you going to get those? How much of the technology do you own? So it's not a painless process of simply buying in something. Well, it isn't always a painless process. Collaborate, different ways of collaboration. Okay, purchasing, which really isn't a very high level of collaboration. Subcontracting or outsourcing is in a sense a collaboration, or you could say that you're simply just buying the technology as well. It depends on what way you want to look at it. Mainly when we're talking about collaboration, we'd be talking about licensing alliances and mergers and acquisitions, where you're either taking over a company or taking over part of a company, or licensing a technology for them, or you're working together on developing something. And really, when you're looking at the type of alliance arrangements that you have, one of the models that would look at is the duration of the commitment to a company versus kind of the degree of control. So if you're kind of just buying a piece of technology or buying a piece of software from someone, you've very little control over it, and it's a very short-term relationship. You know, or maybe you get in someone to do a bit of industrial design on your product. Again, it will tend to be a short relationship, and you just don't have much control. You'll take whatever they design for you. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, you might have something that's much longer term, and you'd be looking at things like mergers and acquisitions, where you're taking over companies and doing a lot more detailed work with companies. I'm not going to go through all of that. I'm going to instead have a look at that case study, because we've got another 20 minutes left, and I think we'll get a lot more out of that. Okay. Have people had a look at that case study, the Procter & Gamble one? Okay, we won't go through the whole lot of it, because I want you to do a particular exercise, so we don't need to go through it. Okay, hang on, before I do this, I just wanted to hand out something to you as well, Throughout, I know I'm using a lot of terms and things throughout all of this, and I just thought that might be useful. We'll just go through this quite quickly. It's just a list of different, actually I'll pass some of them to the back if you give me half of them, I'll be done. Split the bundle in two. Perfect. Okay. Just in working through kind of the whole area of acquisition, there were some key terms. And what I'll do as we go through, I'll update more key terms, you know, based on different topics as they come up, so that you'll have those.
So the slides you're up there on the screen, are they going to be on Moodle?
They are in Moodle. Well, yeah, aren't they? Has anyone looked? Okay, that's all you can see so far in Moodle. These slides are here. Oh no, that's not those slides. Maybe I didn't put them up. Oh yeah, there it is. There's the lecture. Yeah, so you can just open it there and see it. Hopefully. I'll just give that a minute to come up. Okay, we'll just go down through those definitions. Is there anything there that you have a problem with? Research and development, I think people know what that is. The process of, those aren't loading down, they should do. Creating technologies in-house or through collaboration. Normally R&D is refers to internal, developing something internally. Absorptive capacity. It's really about the ability of a firm to take on a new technology. So in order for a firm to actually make use of a new technology, you can imagine, I mean, a good way to explain that would be a firm buying in a very complex piece of equipment. Unless they had the expertise to use that piece of equipment to do whatever it does to the best of their technology, they don't have the capacity to really gain the benefit from it. So absorptive capacity is about having the ability in-house to actually take on a new technology and to benefit from it and make the most of it. A portfolio, and we spoke about, you know, when we were looking at the difference between the different types of whether it was radical or incremental. A portfolio is a collection of products that focus on achieving the company's core strengths, but it's really just the collection of products that a company has. I don't know why that's not loading down. It's just been very slow. Anyway, don't worry about it. It's there anyway, trust me, they're there. Maybe if you've got a faster link, they are there. Intellectual property, we'll talk about that under protection. So intellectual property is all the different legal ways that you can have to protect your technologies or protect your what they call intangible assets of a company. The development funnel is that diagram that we looked at where you start with a lot of ideas and come down to fewer ideas at the end. Okay, sometimes known as the idea funnel. So this notion of starting of a lot of ideas. Market research aims to find out why a market is there and what you're doing with the market. Concurrent engineering is something you'll come across a lot again. It's where instead of working sequentially on something, you'll work on things in parallel. So, you know, an example could be if you're develop a new phone that has a software element and a design and an electronics part, you'd work on all of those three aspects of the design together. Product family is very often associated with a platform, so it's a lot of products that kind of share a core technology. Utilization is just how much, the extent to which you're using your existing technologies. Business process engineering is a particular kind of methodology that was really developed in the 90s that allow people to kind of relook at how what their processes in their companies are doing and how they can be made more efficient and more effective. Alliances are collaborations between organizations, and they can happen in different ways. M&A stands for mergers and alliances, so it's looking at how are we acquiring and how are we working with other companies to get technology. Licensing is conventional, where a company holds a license for the use of a technology that somebody else has developed. Contracting R&D is where a company uses services of another company to develop their new products. And diffusion is the term that describes how technology spread, how the use of technology is spread. So, you know, you can see again, the use of the internet is a good example where you've seen diffusion of products. Now, I wanted to go on and work on the paper there. What the paper is, it's a description by one of the senior R&D managers, or he's a senior vice president of R&D in Procter & Gamble, about how they acquire technology. And the main point he's making in the paper is that they don't just develop things internally, but they actually look externally a lot. And it's really kind of captured in that figure 2, where it looks at all the different ways that they can actually, and the different things that they have in place for gathering technologies. Procter & Gamble, if you look at the dark diagram there, Procter & Gamble started with what? What was the first product that Procter & Gamble made? Anybody? Candles, yeah, first. And then they moved from candles into soap, because soap, again, was using animal fats, and the whole process of rendering to make candles could also be applied to soap. So they moved into something quite similar. And from that, they moved into food products, a thing that they called Crisco, which was an all-vegetable shortening, a margarine kind of a thing. And then they got into different types of kind of products that were based around that same technology. So they started working on emulsifiers, surfactants, and different technologies, as well as soap products and different cleaning products, and then into shampoos and dishwasher products, vegetable oils. And if you have a look at the map there on the back, like, I mean, Procter & Gamble or this diagram, they're a big diversified company. And it's really kind of showing you some of the things that they get into, whether it's detergents or higher levels of cleaning products, vegetable oils, nappies. You know, they have a huge, huge range of products. But they basically started with candles, which is interesting to see how a company like that grows. And what this guy's talking about in his paper is one of the problems for Procter & Gamble isn't necessarily about doing internal R&D and developing new technologies. One of their problems is they've got so much technology, they've got so many technologies developed all over the place, is actually, it's kind of onto the exploit thing here really, is how to make use of them and where they can be used. They have, how many people in Procter & Gamble? In total, does it say it here? Did anybody see it? No, they have 8,000 researchers. That's just the researchers, that's not their total employment. I don't think, we might look that up online. I might look that up online.
They let go of 50 people there last year, or the year before.
Did they?
A lot of people.
Yeah. Why? What happened to them? Why did they let them go?
Don't know, they must. I think they closed one part of their factory or something.
Just in Ireland?
Yeah.
Right, yeah. But I mean, you can imagine for a company like Procter & Gamble, that's a very small decision compared to the thousands of people that they have employed. Like if they have 8,000 researchers in 19 different centres, you know, they have 30, 40,000 employees. So that, you know, it's a massive, big organisation. So what the paper here is about is saying that they have a lot of different ways that allow them to find out what technologies are there and to make use of the technologies that there are there. And what I want people to do for the last 10 minutes is that there are 6 basic ways. So I'm going to divide you into 6 groups. And each one of you is going to look at one way. So in that diagram, he kind of describes in detail 6 different ways that they use for developing technologies and for actually acquiring technologies and finding uses for technologies. One is communities of practice, which is very much an internal thing. So you can see communities of practice there is linked to some of the internal ways. Technology entrepreneurs, so there's a way that they encourage people to develop new technologies. Joint technology developments, which is again starting to look external. Licensing, which is kind of traditional licensing, but they're starting to do a little bit more. Working with the federal government and university research. So I just want to split you into groups of 6, and within your group, just to nominate somebody to explain to the rest of the group how those things work. Okay? How many people have we got all together? So stand up, lift up your chair, and I'd put one group here. Hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. 26 divided by 6 is 4 and a couple of 5s, isn't it? So I'll just move you together. The first 4 here, just move your chairs and sit in the corner there. Just pick up your chairs and make a group of them there. The next 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Form a group wherever you are. 4 of you there, take your chairs and just move into the corner there. Say 3 along the back and you 2 there, move down into that corner, and I'll have to make you into 2 groups. The 4 there, 2 in front, 2 behind, move there, and you 4 there, just move over to there. So I want groups of 4 or 5, 6 groups. Okay. Will you read up on communities of practice, nominate a spokesperson who is going to tell the rest of the class in 5 minutes' time how communities of practice work, okay? So that's all you have to read, a little bit there on communities of practice, and you're going to tell everybody how that works. Okay, you guys here, you're going to talk about, there are a lot of you, I'll give you joint technology developments, okay? So read up on joint technology developments, that's that bit there. And you're going to tell, in about 5 minutes, you're going to tell the rest of the class how do joint technology developments work at Procter & Gamble. Okay, this is actually an easier paper than the other ones I've given you to read. You can talk about, you will not? No, I'm going to give you licensing because there are so many of you there and you're next to the window in a prime position. So read licensing, and then you're going to tell the rest of the class, you nominate one person to talk who's going to tell us in about 3 sentences what do they do in licensing, what did Procter & Gamble do and how does it work for them. You can work with federal government, okay? So read the piece on federal government, and again, nominate a spokesperson who's going to tell the class how federal government works. Have I 2 separate groups here, yeah? Yeah. Okay, you work at university research. What do they do in university research? How does it work for Procter & Gamble in terms of acquiring technologies? And what's left, what haven't I done? Is anyone doing technology entrepreneurs? Yeah? Anybody doing joint technology developments? How many groups have I got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I must have something left. Someone's doing licensing, are they? Somebody doing federal government? And somebody doing university research? So what am I missing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Sorry, what are you doing?
Technology development.
So who's doing technology entrepreneurs? Yeah. Okay. Oh, it's nice and short. Okay. Okay. So just read that piece, and then have you got your notes?
No, I only moved into the course today.
How many sets of notes have you got between? You have a set of notes. Have you a set of notes?
I do.
Okay. Share that between the 2 of you. Okay. So, yeah, at the very start, it's the first paper, right to the very start.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, this is examinable, just so that you know. Like, I expect you to, okay, we've just read a little bit of this paper, but I do expect you to read all of this paper. I don't know that we're going to get all the way through that book. I guess we're not, probably. But what we do get through, I expect you to have read and to know. Okay? You're allowed to talk. You don't have to be quiet. Actually, do you know what you might do as well? Maybe if we have time, just look up Procter & Gamble on Wikipedia, because they're actually very interesting. I mean, look at the number of brands they have, kind of major household names. Look at them. They developed the first toothpaste with fluoride in it. They own Dolce & Gabbana. Huge number of brands there. Okay, we're almost out of time. Can we just have 2 sentences back from each group as to who has my notes? Okay, we'll start as you, because you were working first. First group here was looking at what? Communities of practice. Quiet and listen up. Will somebody tell us how do they manage? What are communities of practice? What do they do with them? Have you had a chance to figure it out?
Give it a go.
Go on.
There are 20 chartered communities of practice in their company.
What's a community of practice?
It's kind of like they break down their company into certain departments. You know?
It's kind of a community of practice is like a group of people with a common problem or studying a common issue. Okay? So does it say what any of the communities of practice are? It doesn't really say, but the idea of the community of practice is that they have, how many? 19 different R&D sites, 19 technical centres all over the world. So they're all working on different things, probably unconnected. And they've set up this kind of global lunchroom or a piece of software, an innovation network. And on that innovation network, they host these communities of practice. So if you're working on a particular type of technology, whether it's a material or a chemical or whatever else, you can see who else within Procter & Gamble is working on the same thing. And if you look at a company from Procter & Gamble, go onto the internet, if you look at all the brands that they own, you know, there's definitely something to be gained by them seeing what other people within the organisation are doing. So a community of practice is people who have got a common problem or a common theme and work together, and they'll just get together, usually globally, to discuss problems and to learn from each other. That's what a community of practice is. Okay, thanks. Who was looking at technology entrepreneurs? I'll leave you because you were the last group. What were you doing?
Joint technology development.
Well, what are Procter & Gamble doing about joint technology development?
Well, it's mostly used in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
To develop new products.
Okay.
And to develop them with other companies such as Alexion.
What do they do with Alexion?
They develop cardiovascular science, and it's for repairing the damaged heart tissue.
Okay. Which would you expect that? Look at Procter & Gamble's products. Or even in here, like they don't seem to be into a huge amount of medical stuff, so they're obviously trying to diversify with that, aren't they? Yeah, so they're looking at what the technologies they have and how could they get new markets with them. Okay, what did you look at?
Licensing.
Okay, quickly on licensing.
Up to about 3 years ago, P&G didn't do much about licensing, but then they set up the technology acquisition group for TAG.
Okay.
And what TAG did is set up new patent strategy for P&G on improving its innovation processes, so that generated more profit for shareholders. So
okay. So one of the main things they found with licensing was with the internet. Remember, this was written in 2002, that companies were appearing on the internet that made the whole process of licensing much easier. So that yet2.com, which would be worth looking up. Look up yet2.com and see what you get out, see what they're all about. Seemed to be a broker company that actually brokered technologies and allowed you to license from different areas. What were you looking at there? Okay, how is the federal government having an impact?
They fund 30 billion.
Right.
Basic research.
For which?
Basic research.
Okay.
Laboratories.
So what was the interesting thing in there that they did? Bombs. Tell me about the bombs.
The atomic and hydrogen bomb.
Yeah, so they went to sorry, we'll just finish up, we'll just be about 2 minutes, I'm sorry for running over. They went to a federal government agency that had developed a whole pile of software to be able to predict what would happen when bombs exploded. They didn't really have much use for that software, so Procter & Gamble went into them to look at how they could use that modelling software that they had to do what? To look at the fluid dynamics of a high-speed diaper assembly machine. So they were looking at that technology, that processing technology, that modelling technology for bombs to see how they could make nappies faster. So it's a very good example of different things. Here, quickly.
University research.
Yeah.
Okay. first thing, the first university they worked with was Indiana University.
Yeah.
And then they discovered the fluoridated toothpaste.
Okay, yes.
And they worked with that.
So they were the first company to come up with fluorinated toothpaste or fluoridated
And they also
toothpaste.
say that working with the universities is not that successful as they think.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And, they had to place lots of people there and work
Okay.
with them and just to look over everything.
Okay, okay, good. We don't have time. Sorry, last group, and I'm sorry I'm rushing you. Although you don't mind, you're happy to be rushed. What did you look at? Technology entrepreneurs.
Yeah, they're the lads that they're like internet gatekeepers, and they if you need anything on the internet, they're the ones who find it for you. It's something like a need in the head check.
Okay, okay. So, and it gave an example of just how hard it is to find technologies.
They find it, like, you know.
Okay, guys, will you make sure you've all read that paper by our next class, okay?